Who's going to win all the individual awards at the end of the season? Where are the playoffs going through each and every single game? How are we going to get over to New Orleans? And then lastly, who is going to win Super Bowl 59? I hope you guys are excited because today is our award ceremony slash playoff slash Super Bowl-esque kind of episode. So I hope you guys are excited, and I want to thank you guys so much for all the support. Over 100 subscribers, getting close to 70,000 views. I am thankful for how much support that I've received on this channel, and we're going to continue to get this going as season 2 begins to wrap up. I will talk about future episodes towards the end of this episode, but we're first going to start with the award ceremony, and then we'll get to the playoffs. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Anyways, let's get started. Starting with the awards ceremony, I'm looking over 7 awards and where I think they're going to go. First of all, MVP is probably going to go to Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, and I chose Josh Allen because while statistically Lamar did better, Josh did a lot more with a lot less and is in a better position, and I believe that his performance this year is the best he's ever had in his career, and if there's any time for him to win MVP, it would be now. Secondly, Offensive Player of the Year is going to go to Saquon Barkley for the historical season he's had with his first year in Philly. Rushing like crazy, has so many great highlights. He's easily Offensive Player of the Year. You could make an argument for other people like Derrick Henry or Jamar Chase, but I believe he runs away with this award easily. Defensive Player of the Year was a little bit of a toss-up. I decided to go with Patrick Surtain, mostly because he, as a cornerback, has been very defensive, obviously very dominant. 4 interceptions this year. He doesn't have the most interceptions, but on passes defend, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the game. And I would have given it to TJ Watt, but with how Denver surged going into the end of the year and the way Pittsburgh has, I'm going to have to give Surtain just a slight bit of edge. But if it goes to TJ Watt, I don't blame the NFL, though I do look at the stats and he's not outstanding in my opinion in any stats. So that's kind of where the Surtain argument comes in. I mean, overall, TJ Watts have a great year, but I'm going to go with Surtain. It's a toss-up. Coach of the Year, though, is not a toss-up for me. It's easily Dan Campbell, and he's not going to end up getting it because they love to go on these stories. It's probably going to go to Minnesota or go to Dan Quinn, but Dan Campbell took a Lions team that got to the NFC Championship game last year and almost made it to the Super Bowl, and led them to a 15-2 record in which they were beating opponents down. Their only 2 losses came to Tampa Bay, who played a great game, and Buffalo, who played one of the most complete games possible. And with all these injuries, he still had this team ready to go week in and week out. You could never count them out. I don't know why Campbell is not considered the high likelihood, even though he should. But that's, if it were me making these awards, I would have chosen Dan Campbell. The comeback player of the year is Sam Darnold, because you can make the argument for Joe Burrow. He had statistically had one of the best seasons, but that doesn't shock me. What shocks me is that his team missed the playoffs. It wasn't because of him, it's because his entire team not that consistent outside of the offense. Defense was, it wasn't great. But with Sam Darnold, he led a Vikings team to a 14-3 record. And we're talking about the same Sam Darnold who struggled with the Jets, whose only playoff season was as a backup to San Francisco's Brock Purdy. That's all he's ever had. He's been known just like clowned around with the Jets, seeing ghosts against New England, dropping off significantly, losing the starting job to Baker Mayfield with the Panthers. But then 14-3, 35 touchdowns this year, 12 interceptions. He's had a great resurgence, and he led the Vikings to the 5th seed. If he could have beaten Detroit, they would have had the number 1 seed. No questions asked. He is comeback player of the year in my mind. They still might give it to Joe Burrow. Offensive Rookie of the Year is no doubt Jaden Daniels. I predicted it from the beginning of the year. I thought he was going to be very strong, and he ended up being exactly what I thought he was going to be, even just a little bit better. I mean, he's had so many great times this year. The big win against Cincinnati early on in the year, that's where his name just started to get up there. And then you had the Hail Mary against Chicago, and he's just played so great. The comeback against Philadelphia. He has a lot of Offensive Rookie of the Year moments, and Despite Bo Nix having a pretty good season as well, Jaden Daniels ran away with this one. Now, Defensive Rookie of the Year is a little bit closer, but like I predicted at the beginning of the year, I'm still going to stick with Quinion Mitchell. He's basically locked down that entire Eagles defense. There was a good stretch where he did not allow more than 30 receiving yards from the opponents he was covering. That's very dominant. Knowing the Eagles have this young and great defense, even Cooper DeJean deserves an honor as a potential Defensive Rookie of the Year. It's really between him and Jared Verse of the Rams, but knowing that the Rams defense, I could not really tell much of improvement, but you can clearly see it with Philadelphia. I'm going to go with Quinion Mitchell on this one. And that is basically the award ceremony. Josh Allen's MVP, Saquon Barkley is Offensive Player of the Year, Patrick Surtain is Defensive Player of the Year, Dan Campbell is the Coach of the Year, Sam Darnold, Comeback Player of the Year, Jaden Daniels, Offensive Rookie of the Year, and Quinion Mitchell, Defensive Rookie of the Year. With all of that said, we finally get the awards out of the way. It's time for the main part of today's episode, the playoffs. 13 games, let's get to it. As a note, this final week I went 10-6 in my picks, making my overall record 186 and 86 throughout the entire season. And so, pretty good year of picks, but we have 13 games left to look at, and we're going to start with the wild card and finish off with the big game, the Super Bowl, which will be held in New Orleans this year. And it should be a good Super Bowl, though, obviously, if you heard what's happened in the past few, you've had to have heard of it. The terrorist attack in New Orleans, God bless all those people who were affected and all the victims that were there. It's just a terrible situation in general. And so there's going to be a lot of security concerns. That's the only thing about the Super Bowl that's like very scary to look at. Other than that, getting to the game, this road to the playoffs, it should be extremely entertaining. And where are we going to start? We are going to start in the AFC. The first game we're going to be looking at is the number 5 versus number 4, which is the 11-6 Los Angeles Chargers playing the 10-7 Houston Texans. This one is kind of straightforward. Houston took a step back this year. Yes, they made the playoffs again. Yes, again as the number 4 seed. I expected CJ Stroud to be in an MVP conversation, maybe even win the MVP. But 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. What a terrible second year, knowing how good he was, knowing the kind of weapons he had. Obviously, there were players who went down. Stephon Diggs went down. But still, he had a lot of, the same weapons he had last year. And Joe Mixon was his running back. And yet this team looked like it took a step back. Defense, make an argument, wasn't that bad. They took a step forward, but the offense, a big one back. And poorly for them, here comes the Los Angeles Chargers, who have one of the better defenses. Joey Bosa is still one of the better defenders in this league. And with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach, first time in the NFL since coaching the Niners back in 2014, Jim Harbaugh took this Chargers team, which had great talent, kind of dropped some of it because it was going to be a run-first, defensive-heavy team. And with this new identity and the fact that I believe Justin Herbert had a very underrated year. Was he outstanding? I wouldn't say so in comparatively to other seasons, but very underrated, knowing that we thought he was going to take a step back because of Jim Harbaugh's scheme. Defense played great, and they finished the season off 11-6. This one, I don't want to count Houston out like I did last year, but they're not giving me a compelling argument. I am going to go with the Chargers to win 24-13. I just really think Houston took a step back offensively, and playing against this Chargers defense, it's not going to work out for them. I believe that LA will move on, and Houston, well, they're going to have to make some offseason adjustments, and CJ Stroud, there's going to be a lot of eyes on him next year to see if he could shake off the sophomore year and do better in his junior year. The next matchup is between the number 6 Pittsburgh Steelers and the number 3 Baltimore Ravens. Pittsburgh ended the year off 10-7. Baltimore was 12-5. And man, these last two games, a big signifier. Obviously, these teams played a couple weeks ago, and the Ravens trashed Pittsburgh big time. And as of recently, Pittsburgh lost to Cincinnati in the last week. Russell Wilson's taken a step back, and there's a lot of questions about Pittsburgh. It's just like, is this a team that will ever get better, or are they just known as this team that has a positive record but no impact in the playoffs? There's so many questions to ask with Pittsburgh, and losing this game will definitely heighten those questions. If they were to win, there's a little bit of change there. I don't think it goes away completely, but still, lose or win, there's a lot of questions to ask with Pittsburgh and where the future lies with that team. As of Baltimore, big year. Lamar Jackson is an MVP candidate. Derrick Henry, I would say, is an Offensive Player of the Year candidate. And those two together were it was stupidly good how great they were. And with Baltimore, they finished the year off pretty strong. Obviously, a big win against Pittsburgh, and then a ginormous victory against Cleveland, 35-10. This is a good year for Baltimore, definitely a step up, despite the fact that their record was less. A little bit of inconsistency towards the middle, but towards the end of this year, they've been a lot better. This one's simple. I'm taking Baltimore, 31-20. It's mostly because Pittsburgh is just having their classical, we're just rolling into the playoffs, don't really have high expectations, but just giving our fans one more year. That's kind of been the Pittsburgh motto for a few years now. And with Baltimore, I mean, this team has Super Bowl aspirations, and they're going to need it soon, because otherwise there's just a lot of issues going on there. And then the 2-7 matchup in the AFC is between the Denver Broncos, who finished the year off 10-7, and the Buffalo Bills, who finished the year off 13-4. This one has some significant key storylines. Obviously, we're talking about Bo Nix, a potential Rookie of the Year candidate. And then Denver also has Patrick Surtain, who is definitely a high potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate. But then you have the opposite side. You have Josh Allen, who I believe will win the MVP. A very high-powered Buffalo Bills team that has had pretty impressive wins, one in which was against Kansas City, handing the Chiefs their first loss. Another was a shootout, following a shootout loss to LA, a shootout victory over the Detroit Lions, who are number 1 in the NFC. This is going to be an interesting game because last time these two teams played, Buffalo lost at just a big gaffe. Denver misses a field goal, but then there was a penalty and Denver got a second chance and made it. That was with Russell Wilson. This is different. This Bills team, they lost Stephon Diggs at the beginning of the year. They lost Gabriel Davis at the beginning of the year. There's high expectations with rookies, but Josh Allen, just unbelievable season. He is truly the driving force of this Bills team, and is going to be very, very obvious in this game. Credit to Denver's defense. No. Give me the Bills to win 35-17. I just think that Bo Nix being in the playoffs and his first playoff game is against Josh Allen, that's rough. A good experience, but that's rough. Give me the Bills. Moving on to the divisional round of the playoffs, starting with the number 5 Chargers winning, and they will be facing the number 1 ranked Kansas City Chiefs, who are 15-2. The Chiefs' year is weird because 15-2. If you didn't watch football all year long, you'd look at this record like, wow, the Chiefs were very dominant. Yet, a majority of these games, they're winning by 1-score possessions. Oftentimes, you can make the argument they were getting lucky. Referees helping out. You can make the argument that the blocked kick against Denver was just them truly being the luckiest team in the NFL. And just, he had the Raiders game on Black Friday. That was lucky. Again, help with the refs. So people don't know how to gauge Kansas City. One thing I can say about the Kansas City Chiefs is that they were consistent in winning. Their defense, at the beginning of the year, their defense was dominant, and then it's kind of sputtered out after that. But you have your players healthy for the most part. Patrick Mahomes, I mean, his leg still probably is bothering him. Travis Kelce took a step back. And Chris Jones, I think he's also dealing with injury, but he's going to probably play this first game, whoever they play, which I believe is going to be the Chargers. The Chargers played close to Kansas City twice, lost both times. Do they get the upper hand? We're talking about the Chiefs in the playoffs at Arrowhead. I believe the resounding answer to that question, to me, is no. I believe the Chiefs will win this game. It will be close. 21-19, because these games tend to be very, very close. But I'm going to take the Chiefs to win because it's in Arrowhead, it's in the playoffs, and of all the teams remaining at this point, the Chargers are the weaker of the teams. So I'll give Kansas City the edge on this one, and they'll go to the NFC Championship, hosting it at Arrowhead. On the opposite end, who's going to play against Kansas City and Arrowhead? It's between the number 3 Baltimore Ravens and the number 2 Buffalo Bills. Now, these two teams played early on in the year, and the Ravens crushed and ran right over Buffalo. It was Buffalo's first loss of the year. Have these teams changed a little bit? Yes, Baltimore a little inconsistent this year following that point. The Bills lost to the Texans right afterwards, but then after that, the only 2 losses they suffered, one was against the Rams and the other, they didn't really play anyone against the Patriots. Even in that Rams game, 42 points put up. Josh Allen had himself another great game and then does it again against the Detroit Lions. The Ravens, they started the year off really hot in the run game, and it's kind of slowed down, but Lamar Jackson has kind of taken over, and he has looked like a really big candidate for the MVP. It's really between the 2 MVPs here, Lamar and Josh Allen. And this one's going to be very exciting if it happens, and I believe it will happen because Denver and Pittsburgh are not strong opponents against these 2. But when it comes to this game, it's in Orchard Park. So my view about this is we're looking at a different Josh Allen, and whoever has more pressure, these 2 both have a lot of pressure. You can make the argument who has more. I think with the home field advantage and with just how Josh Allen has played, and I believe the defense has gotten a hang of things, sort of, even though they still had that 2-game span where they gave over 40 points each. I am going to give it to the Bills to win this one 45-34. I just think that in the condition that Baltimore is in, Buffalo's a tough place to play. The Chiefs went there, won last year. Kudos to them. But the Bills overall, I mean, it doesn't matter where they are. They love these elements. And the last time these 2 teams played in the playoffs, it was in Orchard Park. Lamar Jackson, yes, he didn't have Derrick Henry, but he got terrorized in that game. I believe it's going to not happen the same way, but it's going to be the same result. Buffalo wins, and they will play Kansas City. With that, we have the AFC Championship game. Round 4. Between Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Mahomes has won all 3 battles in the playoffs, 2 times in Arrowhead, 1 time at Orchard. And we're coming back to a very familiar scene in which when Josh Allen first started lighting it up, he faced Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship game in which he got belted, destroyed by the Chiefs. But, times have changed. The 2 times afterwards, the Bills should have won the second time around, but for some reason, 13 seconds was still a lot of time for Kansas City, which was just mind-blowing to me. And then the second time around should have had a good opportunity to win against the Chiefs in Buffalo, but their field goal kicker missed. So there's that. Looking at this matchup, both teams look so different. I want to say Kansas City's better than last year's team, because to be fair, last year's team dropped everything. They had one of the worst wide receiver corps in all of football, and they took a step forward, but they don't have that pizzazz, that spark. They're just barely winning. While Buffalo, on the other hand, is like dropping bombs on teams. At full strength, this Bills team is just so hard to gauge, and Chiefs had 2 losses, 1 legitimate loss, and that was to Buffalo. I call the other one illegitimate because they didn't start anybody, and obviously they weren't going to risk injuries, so they were going to lose that game against Denver. But with the Buffalo game, I mean, the Bills were practically in control for all of that second half. So I have to... It's Kansas City in the postseason at home. I know people are going to be like, oh, here comes the stereotypical comment again, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I will take the Bills to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, and I believe that Buffalo will go to the Super Bowl, but I'm knocking on wood with that one because obviously it's Kansas City in the playoffs. But if Mahomes is not at 100% and we're looking at a Bills team which is hungrier than ever, at some point it's going to have to give eventually, right? Josh Allen's going to have to get by Mahomes at some point, right? And I think if you have any great time to do it, now's the time. And with that said, the Bills would make the Super Bowl from the AFC side. Now, let's move over to the NFC. Similarly, we're going to start at the 4-5 matchup, which is between the Minnesota Vikings, who finished the year off 14-3, and the Los Angeles Rams, who finished the year off 10-7. Weird years, especially with all these NFC teams. First of all, Sam Darnold led the Vikings to a 14-3 record. And because of his poor performance against the Lions, people are questioning whether he's going to be the quarterback of the future. That's so weird coming from a team that went 14-3, but that's kind of the person Sam Darnold is. You just never know. And the Vikings offensively were pretty strong this year. Sam Darnold had 35 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Justin Jefferson had himself another great year. As for the Rams, you start the year off extremely slow. Your first win was against the Niners in a comeback. but they dealt with injury early on. Puka Nacua goes out the first game of the year. Cooper Kupp goes out the second game. And what it looked like was a Rams team that was in shambles. But then slowly but surely, they meticulously brought their way back up from the ashes. At one point in the year, teams were at 5-5, 6-4, 4-6 in that specific division, the NFC West. And the Rams just kept on bulldozing. Their most significant win was against the Bills in a shootout, 44-42. And I believe that cemented their chances to win the NFC. Because afterwards, it was kind of a cakewalk. Even though they lost to Seattle, that loss was pretty bad because now they're the number 4 seed. And I don't know why they lost that game. They needed to win that one. Congratulations to the Rams. Matthew Stafford's having himself a very nice season. And of course, that wide receiver core between Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, very strong and should continue to be a strong wide receiver core for the foreseeable future in LA. Now, when I look at this matchup, the Rams were one of 2 teams to hand Minnesota a loss this year. Obviously, that one came on a Thursday night, 28-20. And then Minnesota's other 2 losses were to Detroit. Got swept by the season with the Detroit Lions, but still finished 14-3. This one is mostly going to come down to defensive play. One of my biggest complaints and arguments with the Rams is I don't doubt that they have a great offense. But outside of Jared Verse, I'm not impressed with that defense. I'm just not. The defense does not move me. And you can throw stats probably better than I expected them to be, but still terrible. So as much as I understand the Rams, they had a strong end to the season, not counting that last game, I'm going to give it to the Vikings to win 28-17. That's pretty controversial because of how Minnesota played against Detroit. But taking a big, long look at it, I give the Vikings defense the edge, and I believe Sam Darnold will make enough plays to give Minnesota a very comfortable win, and then they'll move on. So I'll take the Vikings in this one, but gritting my teeth a little. The 3 versus 6 matchup is between the Washington Commanders, who finished the year off 11-6, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who finished the year off 10-7, and hopped the Los Angeles Rams. Man, these 2 teams played in the beginning of the year. I said Washington would win. They lost. They got absolutely smoked. But since then, Washington played a great year, albeit some of their losses came against great opponents and then a game against the Cowboys. They've had some pretty significant moments, and they're led by Jaden Daniels, who I believe will win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I don't think there's much debate there. As for Tampa Bay, the only slow start to the year, the worst stint that they had was when they lost Mike Evans, and they already lost Godwin, so their offense was riddled. But once Mike Evans got back, it looks like that team got back on track. Bucky Irving was a standout star this year. He deserves a lot of credit. And then Baker Mayfield, he gets the contract, brings him back to the playoffs. Higher seed than last year. Impressive. And by the way, congratulations, Mike Evans, 11 seasons in a row with over 1,000 receiving yards. He is for sure a first ballot Hall of Famer and arguably the best wide receiver in Tampa Bay Buccaneers history. I don't think many people will dispute that. We'll see. Looking at this game, it's confusing. And the reason why it's confusing is because Tampa Bay seems like a surefire pick. But they did struggle against New Orleans. Now, obviously, they had to get it going towards the end. It's these random struggles with certain teams. I look at Washington and I'm like, wow, this team has a player who's clutch in Jaden Daniels. He had some comeback victories, or at least some game-winning drives against Philly, against Atlanta in the last few weeks of the season. So I'm impressed with how Washington finished off. Obviously, another impressive come from behind victory against the Cowboys, though not so impressive when you realize the Cowboys were starting their 3rd-string quarterback. Whatever. I'm going to go, regrettably, as much as I love the Buccaneers, I'm going to go with the Commanders to win in a close 31-27 bout. I just really like Jaden Daniels. And it's probably going to be the same whole CJ Stroud thing, but I believe that Jaden Daniels is definitely the quarterback for the future with Washington, and I believe that the Commanders will win this game. And with that being said, that's 2 teams in the NFC who are road teams who I believe are going to win. But that one is, again, very controversial. Buccaneers can easily win that one. And if that's the case, then it was just a shot in the dark, and it was a big upset predictor that didn't go my way. Other than that, I have confidence that Washington will get it done. And then what I believe is going to be the best game of the first round of the playoffs. Number 7, Green Bay at 11-6. Number 2, Philadelphia at 14-3. Man, a lot of high records in the NFC. Again, another crazy year. To me, this is simple. Philadelphia is tough. They are a strong team. I like this new Green Bay Packers team, but my question is to Jordan Love. You played the Cowboys. The Cowboys are notoriously known for failing in the playoffs, and you were on a hot streak. You lose this game against the Bears. I don't know how you lose it. Now, winning wouldn't have mattered because the Commanders won, but still, how do you lose this game? I don't. To me, Philadelphia has had one of the most impressive years I've ever seen. Their 3 losses this year, inconsistent. You know, the Falcons early on, the Buccaneers early on. Those were at the time when the Eagles did not know what was going on and Sirianni was on the hot seat. Ever since then, they basically went 12-1. Their only loss being to the Commanders. They didn't have Jalen Hurts, so that just, I don't know. They were up by a lot, but, you know, they choked that game. Oh, well. The Eagles, I don't know where Jalen Hurts is, you know, his status. I believe he will play. And of course, you have Saquon Barkley, you have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. You have such a loaded offense, and your defense is extremely young and extremely great. Jalen Carter is a great player. I had Quinion Mitchell as the Rookie of the Year on the defensive side. And then, of course, Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay. I mean, they've had amazing talent throughout the year, and it's not going to stop with this game. Really, it's just the Jordan Love show for me, and of course, Josh Jacobs had himself one heck of a year, but I'd rather have Barkley over Jacobs. Right now, I'd rather have Hurts over Jordan Love. Give me the Eagles to win 24-20. It's at home. I think it's going to be close. It was close last time they played in Brazil, but it's still going to be close. I'm going to take the Eagles, and I believe the Eagles will continue to host in the playoffs at least one more round. Matchup against the number 1 team. The Washington Commanders versus the 15-2 Detroit Lions, who were number 1, first time ever. They're hosting an entire NFC, number 1 seed. This is the best team in football, the Lions, without question. I know they've dealt with injury, but wow. Dan Campbell, I said he needs to be the coach of the year. He led a Lions team, whether fully healthy or not, to a 15-2 record. Very well deserved. Washington, you know, they played many good teams this year and have struggled. Philadelphia, they've struggled with, obviously. You know, Tampa Bay, they've struggled with. But Washington overall, it has never played a team like the Detroit Lions. The Lions are tough. They are an extremely terrifying team. And it's really not because they have such a standout player. Their rushing game is unbelievable. Jahmyr Gibbs had 4 total touchdowns against Minnesota. And it's not like, you know, Jared Goff is... Yeah, he's had a great year statistically, but still, like, he's not super standoutish. It's just the offensive and the defensive scheme of Coach Campbell is unbelievable. He put great coaches around him. He has great players who are bought into the system, and it looks something like this. To me, unfortunately, Washington is just completely outmatched. Give me the Lions to win 34-20. I just believe that Detroit is just so strong. Doesn't matter who's playing. They have a scheme for every single situation that is, I'm not saying foolproof, but it's very highly proofed. And so I will take the Lions to win, and they will host the NFC Championship. First time ever they're hosting one. But yeah, Washington, nice year. You're running into the Lions, and if you could just get by Tampa Bay, I don't think there's any way they get by Detroit. The team that will play Detroit is between the number 5 Minnesota Vikings and the number 2 Philadelphia Eagles, both with 14-3 records. So this is a very high-profile game. But there's just one issue. If Sam Darnold played atrociously against a banged-up Lions defense who had to switch up its scheme and get prepared to, you know, give Sam Darnold a run for his money, only allowing 9 points, did not allow him to get in the end zone one time. What do you think is going to happen against a very young and healthy Philadelphia defense? And not to mention, we're talking about Detroit's offense in the rushing game. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown. Minnesota is outmatched, even worse than Washington is with Detroit. I am going to take the Eagles to win 34-13. What do you say about this matchup? Sure, it can be competitive. Could the Eagles blunder a little bit? Why not? But when you look at this, just the depth of Philadelphia's offense and their defense, both areas, they completely outmatch Minnesota. Yes, they have the better wide receiver. Do they have the better wide receiver core? That's debatable. I believe the Eagles have a better core. I'm going to take Philadelphia big, and it will be Philadelphia who will play Detroit in the NFC Championship. Which then leads us back to Detroit. The NFC Championship game is between the number 2 Philadelphia Eagles and the number 1 Detroit Lions. What an interesting year. I remember at the beginning of the Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown era, their first game was against Detroit. That year they went to the Super Bowl and lost to Kansas City. The year afterwards, Philadelphia took a step back and Detroit took a step forward, won the NFC North, and got to go to the NFC Championship game. So this is the second year in a row they make it to the NFC Championship game, but they've never seen the Super Bowl. Now, Philadelphia's been in this position, so they have the experience. But my question to Philadelphia is, can you outcoach Dan Campbell? Can Sirianni outcoach Dan Campbell? Do I think they have the players that can beat Detroit? Absolutely. And they're way more healthier than Detroit is. The big problem is with coaching. Sirianni, it was really Sirianni that kind of blew it against Kansas City in the Super Bowl, and he was on the hot seat earlier this year. At no point is Dan Campbell in this year on the hot seat. His team has been too ferocious to be on the hot seat. So I like to look at this matchup, and you know what? Philadelphia could have hosted this game, but because the Eagles lost to Washington because Jalen Hurts went down and could not stop Washington's final drive, Detroit's back in this place of, success. Dan Campbell, he's knocking at the door, and I believe the door begins to crack open. Give me the Lions to win 38-31 over Philadelphia, and with that, the Detroit Lions make their way to the Super Bowl for the first time since the Super Bowl's inception, first time in franchise history. And that will put Dan Campbell as the best coach in Detroit history, without a question. And then all eyes are on the big game in New Orleans, Super Bowl 59, between the AFC champion Buffalo Bills at 13-4 versus the NFC champion Detroit Lions at 15-2. The coolest part about this Super Bowl is the fact that one of these teams, whoever wins, will secure their first ever Super Bowl, but it's been pretty different how these roads have happened. The Bills are historically known for going to 4 straight Super Bowls in the 90s, losing all 4, New York, Washington, and the Cowboys twice, while Detroit has never really ever sniffed the Super Bowl. So, to me, Detroit is, they're getting to the big game for the first time in franchise history for Buffalo. It's a return after a very long time. But second cool part about this matchup, we've already seen it. Arguably the game of the year. Bills beating the Lions 48-42. And the fun fact that the Bills handed the Lions their second loss, the Chiefs their first loss, and both teams are number 1 in their respective conferences. The Bills have been a boogeyman in the NFL this year. The Lions, I don't know how many pieces they'll have healthy by the time this game kicks off. Well, all I know is Josh Allen's on the opposite side of that field, and he has been knocking at the door for an extremely long time since the COVID season. He's been right there. He's been wanting it really, really badly. And so if I'm picking this game, I'm thinking about it, who wants it more? And again, we've been talking about how Detroit has been knocking at the door, but Buffalo has been knocking at it a lot longer. I believe when you match these teams up, we're going to see a similar result. I will take the Buffalo Bills to win Super Bowl 59 by a score of 35-32. It will be a close game no matter what. It's really going to come down to some of these last few drives, but the Bills ought to break through and win their first ever Lombardi trophy. And Josh Allen will finally beat the allegations that he's great, but never a Patrick Mahomes, never on that level. He will finally beat the allegations because, quite frankly, there's nothing that could stop anybody from saying, well, he got to a Super Bowl and he won it. But that is my prediction of the entire playoff picture. Obviously, there's some gambles I'm taking, especially on the NFC side. I believe that the Bills overall, by the time this is all said and done, will win Super Bowl 59. And the Lions, great year, but not really a great team to match up with a Bills team that has been hungry all year long and has been one of the most dominant teams in all of football. And the Lions got to see that, of course, a couple weeks back. And that'll do it for today's episode. I want to thank you guys so much for following me through this entire season. It's been a very interesting run. Obviously, my Dallas Cowboys had a very disappointing year, but even despite that, and fantasy football was pretty disappointing, it was still a very fun year, especially on the college football side. As we are speaking, and obviously this episode is coming out Friday, so the Notre Dame game hasn't been played yet. For all I know, they could lose against Penn State or they can win, but I've been happy on the college side because my Irish have been playing incredibly this year. I hope they make the championship. Obviously, we'll know if they have a shot at it or if they're already out of the playoffs by the time you're hearing me say this. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. The episodes following, I believe there's just going to be one more. And the last episode will be the Super Bowl episode. But there will be shorts throughout the weeks leading up to it. Obviously, I want to keep up with the playoffs, both on the college and the NFL side. And yeah, episode 41 will be about the Super Bowl, and it will be the season finale. And then I don't know how many weeks I'll take before kickstarting season 3. But obviously, there's some things I want to try to figure out the format of what I want to do for season 3. I want to learn a little bit of things, maybe get some editing practice. Who knows? But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.